The wind howled across the old metal roofs of the human outpost on Cythera. It was late evening and the sky above glowed with a dull purple hue. Thick with rain clouds, Elias was inside his small wooden shelter, sipping a hot drink and watching the storm grow stronger outside. He lived alone, far from the city center, far from trouble, far from people. That's how he liked it, quiet, peaceful, and simple. But peace was about to end that night. A loud knock echoed through the wooden door. Sharp and urgent, Elias blinked, confused, then stood up slowly. Nobody came this far out unless they were lost or desperate. He opened the door with caution, and what he saw froze him in place. A woman stood in the rain, completely drenched, her body trembling from the cold, but she wasn't human. Her skin had a soft violet glow. With faint silver markings down her cheeks and arms, her eyes were large, glowing pale blue. Filled with water and fear, she looked young, maybe in her early 20s if he had to guess. But she looked broken too, lost and worn, like someone who had seen too much pain. She dropped to her knees right there in the mud. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please, please, human, marry me." Elias didn't speak for a moment. He thought maybe he had heard wrong, or maybe she was hallucinating. She looked up at him, her lips shaking, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "I don't want to be taken. I don't want to disappear," she begged. "I can cook, I can clean, I'll do anything. Please say you'll take me as your wife." Elias opened his mouth, but nothing came out. This wasn't something that happened to him. This wasn't something that happened to anyone. She suddenly swayed forward, her knees buckling, and Elias rushed forward just in time to catch her. Her body was burning up from cold, thin, too light, like she hadn't eaten in days. He didn't think. He just lifted her in his arms and carried her inside. The door slammed behind them as the storm rolled louder. He laid her gently on the old couch near the fire. She didn't speak. Her eyes fluttered closed as he wrapped a blanket around her. Her body shook under the thick cloth, and she let out a quiet sigh before going completely still. Elias sat down beside her, staring at the strange alien woman he had just brought into his home. He had seen many aliens on this planet, but none like her. She wore tattered robes, barely enough to cover her. There were bruises on her arms, and dried mud on her bare feet. This woman had suffered, but why him? Why did she come here, and why did she say that? Marry her? A stranger? What was she running from? The wind shook the windows, and Elias stood to check them. As he moved, he glanced at her again and noticed something glowing on her neck, just under her collarbone. A burned symbol, like a brand he had seen it before. On the lowest castes of alien society, it meant she had no family, no bond, no protector. In this region of Cythera, that meant she could be taken, sold, or worse, unless she was bonded by marriage. He rubbed his face with both hands, trying to understand what he was being pulled into. He could throw her out, let the guards find her, say it wasn't his problem. But when he looked at her face again, soft, bruised, peaceful in sleep, he knew he wouldn't. Something about her made him feel something he hadn't felt in years: responsibility. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the dirt from the world. Inside, a strange silence filled the room as the fire crackled. He sat back down, thinking of her words. "I'll do anything. Please say you'll take me as your wife." He had no answer yet, but something inside told him that this was only the beginning, and that tomorrow his life would never be the same. When Sira opened her eyes, the firelight danced across the ceiling. She blinked slowly. Feeling warmth for the first time in days, a blanket covered her and her head rested on something soft. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was. The storm outside had quieted, replaced by the gentle drip of water from the roof. She sat up quickly, heart racing, afraid she had been caught. But she wasn't in a cell or in chains. She was still in the human's home. The one with kind eyes. Elias was sitting at the table, a steaming cup in his hand, watching her calmly. "You're awake," he said quietly, his voice calm. Sira nodded, clutching the blanket around her body. "I didn't mean to faint," she said, her voice low. I hadn't eaten in 2 days." Elias pushed a small plate of warm food toward her without a word. Sira stared at it, hands trembling, then looked at him with hesitation. "You don't want anything in return?" she whispered. He shook his head. "Eat first. Talk after." She grabbed the bread and stew like a starving child, chewing quickly, her body shaking with every bite. Elias didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. He just waited. When she finished, She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Ashamed. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I wasn't raised to eat like that. It's all right, he replied. You're safe here for now. Sierra looked at him with wide eyes. But not forever? Elias leaned back in his chair, studying her. You asked me to marry you, he said slowly. Do you understand what that means on this planet? She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Yes, it means I would be under your protection. Your care, your name, she whispered. And if you say no, the guards will take me back. Back to what? Elias asked. What were you running from? Sierra hesitated, her hands gripping the fabric in her lap. I was born in the lower caste, she said, voice trembling. My family sold me when I was 12. Said I wasn't useful to keep around. I worked in places where they treat girls like tools, not people. Her voice cracked, and she looked away, ashamed. Last month, I escaped from one of those places, but here, unbonded women are hunted. Elias remained silent, letting her speak at her own pace. I don't want to be property, she continued. So I came here, hoping maybe a kind man might just say yes. Just for the law, she added quickly. I won't bother you, I'll stay quiet, I'll do chores. Anything. Elias stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gray hills outside. You don't even know me, he said without turning around. I could be cruel too. You didn't leave me in the rain, she replied softly. That tells me enough. There was a silence between them, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind that fills a room when two people don't know what to say. Only the wind and dripping water filled the space. Suddenly, a loud knock came again at the door, harder this time. Sierra's body tensed and her eyes filled with panic. No, she whispered, backing into the corner. They found me. Elias motioned for her to stay low and stepped toward the door. He opened it slowly, revealing two tall alien enforcers in black armor. They scanned him up and down, their faces unreadable. We are looking for a runaway female, one said coldly. Bondless marked, Elias didn't flinch. What does she look like? Purple skin, silver markings about your height, the other replied. We tracked her to this district. She's not here, Elias said, trying to keep his voice calm. Are you married, human? One asked suddenly. Elias blinked, then nodded. Yes, I am. The guards exchanged glances. Show us, they demanded. Bond-proof, Elias hesitated, then stepped aside. Sierra stepped out slowly. Still wrapped in the blanket, she lowered her eyes and stood beside him, trying to breathe. This is my wife, Elias said, his voice steady. She's under my name now. The guard scanned her neck, saw the mark and frowned. She must be registered soon, one warned, or your claim is invalid. Elias nodded once. We'll take care of it. The guard stared at them for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. When the door closed, Sierra nearly collapsed again. Elias caught her. Holding her steady, you just saved me again, she whispered, tears in her eyes. Elias helped her sit back down, then sat across from her. You said you needed a husband to survive, he said slowly. Well, I just became one. The next morning, the air was still heavy with moisture from the storm. Elias stood outside his small home, watching the clouds drift across the purple sky. Inside, Sierra was cleaning the floor with quiet movements. She hadn't spoken much since the guards left the night before. She didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. Elias had slept in a chair, watching the door, just in case the enforcers returned. His mind replayed the lie he told. 3 simple words. She's my wife. A lie that came from instinct. Not from thought, a lie that saved her life, but now, it had become truth in the eyes of the alien law. Sierra peeked her head out the door. There's someone coming, she said, her voice tight. Elias turned, his heart already sinking. 2 enforcers again. Same armor, same stone faces, and behind them, a third figure. Older, taller, wearing a deep blue robe. This one's different, Sierra whispered. Shrinking behind Elias, the older figure stepped forward, holding a black data pad. I am Registrar Talvek, he said without emotion. Marriage confirmation requested. Elias tried to keep his face calm. What confirmation? Under Cythera law, all new bondings must be confirmed within 48 hours, Talvek explained. Failure to complete the ritual will revoke protection. And she, he gestured toward Sierra, will be reclassified. Sierra's knees shook. Reclassified meant slave, property, or worse. She had seen others reclassified. They were never seen again. We'll do it, Elias said quickly. Talvek raised an eyebrow. You agree to the ritual? Elias nodded. The registrar turned to one of the guards. Prepare the records. We begin now. Elias glanced at Sira, who looked ready to collapse again. But she gave him a small nod, trusting him completely, even though they barely knew each other. Inside the small home, Talvek set up the bonding tablet. The ritual was short but cold. It required 2 sentences from each person, a touch of hands and a scan of both blood samples. Elias spoke first. I accept this bond and agree to protect her as my wife. His voice was steady. Though his heart pounded hard, Sira followed, her voice soft but clear. I accept him and place my trust in his care. For as long as I live. The tablet blinked once, then displayed the word bond accepted in glowing green letters. Talvek nodded once. From this moment, she is your legal partner, he said, and your responsibility. As the registrar left with the guards, Elias closed the door and leaned against it. He looked over at Sira, who was sitting on the floor, her hands still shaking. It's done, he said, unsure whether to be relieved or scared. She looked up at him with tears building in her eyes. You really did it, she whispered. You didn't have to. But you did. Elias didn't know what to say. He hadn't planned this, hadn't thought it through. But something deep inside told him it was the right thing. Sira slowly stood and walked over to him. I will not be a burden, she said, trying to sound strong. I will work, I will cook. I will never shame your name. He raised a hand gently, stopping her words. This isn't about payment, he said. It's about safety. Yours and mine. She looked confused. Yours too? Elias nodded. If the enforcers think I lied to them or helped a runaway, they could arrest me too. This way we protect each other. Sira lowered her eyes. Still, no one has ever protected me like this, she said, voice trembling. Not even when I was a child. Elias turned away, feeling strange emotions he hadn't faced in years. Pity, yes, but something more than that. Respect, maybe, or admiration for her strength, even after all she'd suffered. She stood proud. As night fell again, they sat in silence, both thinking about what had just happened. The bond was real now, at least on paper. But they were still strangers. Still 2 lives forced into one. Elias lit a small lamp and handed her a fresh blanket. You can take the bed, he said. I'll sleep on the chair again. Sira stared at him in shock. You don't want me to sleep beside you? Her voice was small, uncertain. Elias shook his head gently. You're not a thing I bought, he said. You're a person, and you deserve respect. For a long moment. She didn't speak. Then quietly she said, Thank you. Husband. It was the first time she said that word, not out of fear, but softly with meaning. Elias smiled faintly. Good night. Wife. As the lamp flickered and the wind outside howled again, 2 strangers shared a home built on a lie. But in the quiet space between fear and safety, something real had begun to grow. The morning sun rose behind thick clouds, casting a pale silver light across the dusty fields. Elias stood by the broken fence near his home, gripping a worn tool in his hand. But his mind wasn't on the repair. It was on the alien woman inside Sira, now his legal wife, at least by the words spoken yesterday. But here on Cythera, words weren't enough. Not to the alien law. The bonding ritual they completed only bought them time. To finalize it, they needed to appear at the official registry in the alien city, sign the documents, submit blood, perform the public vow. If they didn't, the local enforcers could revoke the bond and claim Sira as unowned. She would vanish into the system again. Sira stepped outside quietly, wearing a long robe Elias had given her. Her silver markings shimmered faintly in the morning light, but her eyes were downcast. You don't have to go with me, she said gently. You've already done enough. Elias shook his head. No, if we don't finish this, the law will tear it apart. They'll come back. Sira looked toward the road leading to the alien city. It was far and she hadn't walked there in years. Not without fear, but if he was going, she would follow. They packed food, water, and a thin bundle of clothes into a worn bag. Elias loaded them onto his small hover cart, and they left without saying goodbye to anyone. Not that anyone would notice, they lived too far out, and no one asked questions anymore. As the city came into view, Sira's hands began to shake again. The towers of metal and light stretched high into the sky, The alien symbols glowing on buildings reminded her of her past, of collars, commands, silence, and pain. Elias noticed her shaking and gently placed a hand over hers. "You're not alone," he said softly. And somehow, those 3 words helped her breathe again. At the registry center, they were greeted by a tall alien clerk with sharp eyes. "Name?" the clerk asked, not bothering to smile. "Elias Kane," he replied. "Registering bond with Syrah. Formerly Cast Void," the clerk typed quickly, then looked up. "Cast Void bonds require full ritual and blood agreement. You agree to take full legal, social, and life responsibility for this female?" Elias didn't hesitate. "I do." The clerk turned to Syrah. "Do you enter this bond by your own will?" Syrah looked up, her voice shaking. "I do." They were led into a ritual chamber, circular, cold, with glowing panels on the walls. In the center stood a priest, old, wrinkled, his eyes tired but alert. "Place your palms together," the priest instructed. Elias and Syrah obeyed, their hands fitting together like broken pieces finding shape. The priest took a glowing needle and pricked each of their thumbs. The blood merged on a glowing stone between them. Blue for him, violet for her. When the colors swirled into one, the priest nodded. "You are now recognized under Cythera law as bonded," he said. "Any harm to her is your crime. Any failure to provide is your shame." He looked at Elias, then at Syrah. "From now on you are not 2 halves," he said. "You are one." The final step was the vow. Elias spoke clearly. "I vow to protect her, feed her, shelter her, and give her dignity as my equal." Syrah's voice trembled, but she did not look away. "I vow to serve him, honor him, and walk beside him in peace or pain." The priest touched the bloodstone, and it glowed bright gold for a moment. "Accepted," he said. "Let the bond be recorded." As they walked out of the chamber, Syrah's legs felt weak, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Relief. The clerk handed Elias a small silver tag, etched with their bond number. "Show this if questioned," the clerk said, "and register your home address within 10 days. Elias nodded and tucked the tag into his jacket. Outside, the city noise returned. Hoverbikes, market shouting, tall buildings humming with energy, but none of it felt loud anymore because Syrah was beside him, walking without chains, without commands, walking as someone's wife, not someone's object. They reached the cart, and for the first time, Syrah smiled, just a little, but it was real. "That was the first time I said vows," she whispered, and no one laughed. Elias looked at her and said, "No one will laugh while I'm around." The ride back home was quiet, but peaceful. Syrah leaned back on the cart seat. Watching the fields pass by, every bump in the road reminded her, this wasn't a dream. This was real. And though they still barely knew each other, something deep inside her whispered, this human man didn't just save her life, he gave it meaning again. The stars were already bright when they returned home. Elias parked the hover cart beside the house and stepped down with a quiet sigh. Syrah climbed down slowly, her legs aching from the long ride. But inside her chest, something warm had started to grow, hope. She looked at the small house again, but this time, it didn't feel like a stranger's place. It felt like something more. Not quite a home yet, but something close, something possible. Elias opened the door and let her enter first. He lit the small lantern and warmed up leftovers from the morning. They didn't speak much while eating, but the silence wasn't heavy like before. It was softer, calmer. After the meal, Elias stood and said, "You should rest." But Syrah didn't move toward the bed. She stood still near the table, her fingers tightening around the edge. "I want to ask you something," she said quietly. Elias sat back down, nodding slowly. "Ask." Syrah raised her eyes to his, glowing softly in the firelight. "What do you want from me?" He blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "You said I'm not a thing you bought," she said, her voice shaky. "But most men expect something. A body to warm their bed, a servant to keep them fed, someone to follow orders. I need to know what you expect of me." Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I expect nothing but honesty," he said slowly. "I didn't marry you to own you," she looked at him, studying his face. "And if I wanted to give you more?" she asked. "If I wanted to sleep beside you, not because I have to, but because I feel safe." Elias was quiet for a moment, then he answered in a low voice. "Then I would say, that choice is always yours. But I'll never demand it." Sierra nodded, biting her lip. Her heart was beating faster now, not from fear but from something unfamiliar. It wasn't duty or debt, it was the feeling of being seen. She walked slowly toward the bed, then stopped and looked over her shoulder. "You can sleep on the bed too," she said. "If you want." Elias hesitated, then stood and crossed the room. He lay down on one side, careful not to crowd her. She lay beside him, facing the wall, her back warm against the blanket. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the wind outside and the soft creak of the house filled the space. Then Sierra spoke, her voice quiet. "I used to sing at night when I was younger, even when I was scared. I'd hum to myself so I wouldn't cry, but after they sold me, I stopped singing." Elias didn't move, but he listened carefully. "Why did you stop?" "Because no one heard," she said, "and I didn't want the wrong people to hear me." Elias turned slightly. "Well, if you ever sing again," he said, "I'll listen." Sierra's eyes filled with tears, and she closed them quickly so he wouldn't see. She hadn't cried in front of anyone in years, not since her real father left and her world broke apart. Minutes passed in silence, and just when Elias thought she had fallen asleep, he heard it, a quiet hum, soft and gentle, like a breeze through trees. It wasn't a full song, just a whisper of one, but it carried something powerful, something beautiful. He didn't speak, didn't move, just lay there listening, because that sound was more honest than any words she could say. When her voice faded into sleep, Elias finally closed his eyes too. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but tonight something had changed. This wasn't just a lie anymore, not just a bond written on a scroll. It was something growing slowly, like a seed under the soil, waiting for spring, and maybe, just maybe, it could become something real. The sun rose slowly behind the dusty hills, painting the sky with soft gold and pale lavender. Elias woke early, as always, but this time he didn't get up right away. He glanced over and saw Sierra still sleeping peacefully beside him. Her long dark lashes rested against her cheeks, and her face looked calm, almost happy. It was the first time he had seen her like that. He didn't move, just watched her for a few seconds more. Something about the way she breathed, the way she held the blanket close, made the room feel warmer. Then gently he rose and stepped outside to start the day. Sierra woke to the smell of cooked grain and fresh water. She sat up, blinking sleep from her eyes, surprised by how rested she felt. The bed still held his warmth, and that made her smile a little when she walked out. She found Elias pouring food into 2 bowls. "You're up," he said with a nod. "I slept," she replied, wrapping the robe around her tighter. Really slept." They ate together at the small wooden table, the air filled with soft morning light. There was no pressure, no demands, no orders. Just 2 people learning how to be in the same space after breakfast. Sierra surprised Elias by going outside and checking the fence. He watched as she tied her robe and knelt beside the broken section. Using her claws carefully, she twisted a piece of wire back into place. "You've done this before?" he asked, stepping beside her. "I used to fix things in the holding pens," she replied. "If something broke and I fixed it fast. They didn't beat me." Elias flinched but said nothing. Instead, he handed her a better tool and helped her adjust the post. They worked side by side for most of the morning. When the sun reached its peak, they both sat under the shade tree near the fence, drinking water from a flask. "You're good at repairs," he said. Sierra gave a shy smile. "I'm good at survival." That afternoon, she found an old broom and cleaned the porch. Humming quietly as she worked, Elias stayed inside, watching her through the window. The woman who had arrived, dirty, cold, and silent, was changing. Bit by bit, she moved with more confidence. More peace, not like someone hiding, but someone beginning to live again. But peace never lasted long on Cythera. By evening, a long black vehicle floated down the road and parked near their house. A man stepped out, tall, with golden armor and a crystal badge on his chest. Elias narrowed his eyes. A government inspector. Sierra stood frozen on the porch, eyes wide with fear. The man approached with slow, deliberate steps, scanning the house. "Elias Kane?" he asked, voice deep and strict. "Yes," Elias replied, stepping between Sierra and the stranger. "Inspector Davin, 3rd Division," the man said. "I've come to verify the legitimacy of your bond." Elias didn't flinch. "We've completed the ritual, registered the bond, and have the silver tag," he said. "I'm aware," the inspector replied, "but there have been rumors." "Rumors?" Elias asked, his jaw tight. "That a human married a caste void to protect her." without affection, without intention. In other words, the inspector said, folding his arms, a lie. Sierra's body tensed behind Elias. Her hands clutching the robe at her chest, Inspector Davin stepped closer. You'll answer questions separately, he said. If your stories don't match, the bond will be revoked and consequences applied. Inside, the questions began, first to Elias, where they met, what her favorite food was, what side of the bed she slept on, then to Sierra, what he did in the mornings, what his last words were before sleep, what scent his shirt carried. She answered them all, quietly but clearly, not because they had practiced, but because she had been paying attention. Because she cared. After nearly an hour, the inspector stood silent for a long moment. You surprised me, he said finally. Your bond is not based on desire or wealth, but something real is growing here. He tapped his datapad and left without another word. When the vehicle disappeared into the horizon, Sierra turned to Elias with wet eyes. I didn't know I remembered that much about you, she said softly. Elias looked at her, the sun casting a soft glow on her violet skin. And I didn't know how much I wanted you to stay, he replied. That night they didn't sleep far apart. They lay close, no words, no need for them. Because the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of meaning. What started as a lie was no longer just survival, it was becoming a choice. The sun set slowly over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep blue. Elias stood beside the small field behind his home. Holding a spade in one hand, he had cleared the ground, thinking maybe it was time to plant something again. He hadn't farmed seriously in years, not since the drought. But now the land felt different, like it had a reason to grow again behind him. Sierra stepped out with a basket of dried herbs. She had been organizing the old storage crates, turning them into a small kitchen space. Her eyes lit up when she saw the tilled earth. You're planting? She asked, a soft smile on her face. Thinking about it, Elias replied, wiping sweat from his brow. We'll need food when the season shifts. She knelt beside him, brushing her hands across the soil. It's good earth, she said quietly. It just needed someone to care for it. Elias looked at her and nodded. Like some other things around here, he said. His voice low, they worked together until the light faded, then went inside. The house smelled like fresh herbs and warm stew. Sierra had learned Elias's favorite foods, simple things but full of flavor. She served him quietly, sitting beside him instead of across from him, not as a servant but as a partner. Later that night, as they sat on the porch under the stars, she leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time, she didn't ask permission. And for the first time, he didn't feel the need to explain anything. They just sat together without fear or confusion. Do you ever think about how strange this all is? Sierra asked softly. I used to live in a cage, she said. Now I'm sitting here next to a man who married me, even when he didn't have to. Elias chuckled gently. And I used to think I'd die alone with rusted tools and a broken fence. But now I've got someone fixing both. Sierra turned to him, her eyes shimmering in the starlight. I thought you only married me to keep the guards away. I did, he said honestly. At first, but that changed, she smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. Me too. There was silence again, but this time it was filled with warmth. Trust had replaced fear, and something deeper had begun to grow between them. Weeks passed, and news spread across the nearby settlements. A human farmer had married a caste-void alien, and she hadn't disappeared, in fact. People who visited began to speak differently. She's strong, some said. She keeps his house clean, fixes equipment, even helps on the field. Others said nothing, but their silence wasn't cruel. It was curious, maybe even respectful. One morning, a group of alien women arrived at the gate. They wore simple clothes and carried bundles of cloth and vegetables. They stood in silence until Sierra came out, surprised. We heard about you, the oldest said. They said you married a human and he didn't break you. Sierra didn't know what to say, but Elias stepped beside her. She's not broken, he said firmly. She's my wife. The women exchanged glances, then stepped forward and offered her gifts, not for survival but for starting over. For winning a life others said was impossible. That night Sierra sat on the edge of the bed. Holding the cloth given to her, it was white, embroidered with silver thread, traditional marriage cloth. I never got to wear this before, she said softly. I wasn't good enough. Elias sat beside her, watching her with quiet eyes. "You're more than good enough," he said. "You're my wife." She looked at him, her heart full. "I don't want this bond to just be about law or protection anymore." Elias reached out and took her hand. "Then let's make it real," he said. They stood beneath the stars that night, no priest, no guards, no scrolls. Just two souls speaking from their hearts. Sierra placed the cloth over her shoulders, trembling but smiling. "I choose you," she said. Elias held her hand tightly. "And I choose you," he replied. From that day forward, no one called her cast void again. She was no longer an outcast, no longer property, no longer forgotten. She was Elias's wife, his partner, his equal. And he was no longer a lonely man with a quiet home. He was her husband, her protector, her beginning together. They built a new life, not from wealth or power, but from kindness, trust, and something stronger than fate. Love that was never planned, but deeply real.